The sound you're hearing is the sound of habitat creation, of crucial water retention to take the edge off mega droughts. It's the sound of fire breaks and fire refugia being born. This sound, if multiplied by millions throughout the West, is the sound of ecological salvation through restoration of watersheds on a really big scale. Join me today as I talk to an expert on beavers and the plan to reverse the damage done by their removal from the landscape, as well as what we can look forward to if we re-water the West by flooding it with beavers. You're listening to the Rewilding Earth podcast. The Rewilding Earth podcast is supported by businesses such as Patagonia, Catula, and Biohabitats, as well as the Whedon Foundation and listeners like you. If you love the work that the Rewilding Institute is doing, please consider donating at rewilding.org. And be sure to sign up for our weekly newsletter while you're there. Ben Goldfarb is an award-winning environmental writer whose journalism has appeared in Mother Jones, Science, The Guardian, Orion, High Country News, and many other publications. His fiction has appeared in the Bellevue Literary Review, Motherboard, and Hopper. He has spoken about environmental storytelling at venues including Stanford and Yale Universities, the American Fisheries Society, and the North American Congress for Conservation Biology. And today we're talking about his book, Eager, The Surprising Secret Life of Beavers and Why They Matter. Ben, thanks so much for taking the time to be on the Rewilding Earth podcast today.
Thanks a lot for having me, Jack.
I'm a fan, and I know you're probably sick of hearing it by now because the book came out in 2018, but I love your book and I appreciate the humor.
Oh, my pleasure. And they're inherently comedic. They're these big, fat, smelly rodents. You got to embrace the comedy of beavers, I think.
It feels like beavers would have a good sense of humor.
Not like those stuffy otters. I think otters are pretty uptight, but beavers can crack a joke.
Well, I know a lot of our listeners have already read your book by now. Others will be picking it up for sure. And I wanted to probably go past a couple of the things. We have some listeners who are beaver adjacent, beaver aware, beaver lovers, beaver believers, I think you call them, and then some newbies. So we want to kind of thread that needle today. And one topic that's been coming up lately on the last few podcasts is landscape amnesia. Even conservationists forget how radically changed the landscape is in North America. You were talking about trout streams. The way that we see trout streams now, like on a magazine cover, are just straight and rocky bottom, clear water. Then you described how they were when beavers were around, radically different, and would not show up on a Field and Stream magazine cover, probably. Right. And so I kind of wanted to get your take on what either the past or the future could look like if we were to coin a popular current phrase, flood the West, flood North America with beavers again.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think it's hard for us to understand, as you say, how green and blue and lush and wet the Western United States especially used to be. They're just amazing accounts of trappers and explorers, crossing places like southeastern Wyoming, which is today basically desert, and finding these, lush marshes full of waterfowl. And, so much of that was, of course, due to beavers. When we killed, several 100 million beavers, in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, we profoundly changed the land in ways that we don't fully understand today. It's one thing that I think about often is that, when you've got a kind of a healthy beaver-rich stream, of course, all of those beaver dams are acting like speed bumps, right? Slowing the water down and spreading the water out across the floodplain. And when you lose all of those beaver-built speed bumps, there's nothing checking the velocity of water, and you get this really dramatic and kind of catastrophic erosion or incision, and that stream gets, locked within its banks, and loses that floodplain connectivity and no longer soaks into the ground and recharges the aquifer, right? So there are, all of these beaver created hydrological and geomorphological connections. When you lose that, I mean, so many of our lush wet meadows and wetlands and floodplains that beavers had pushed streams onto lost that stream connection and, basically desiccated, and I think we're not really accustomed to thinking about the fur trade in the same terms as, the deforestation of New England or the busting of the Midwestern prairie, or, gold mining in the Sierra Nevada, as being this kind of seminal ecological catastrophe. But, there's no question that it dried out North America in a huge way, and that, fur trading was one of the most destructive and earliest things that white people did in North America.
What would be happening right now during this mega drought, and especially in the West, Southwest, if beavers were back in the historic population numbers? What would the landscape be like, full of beavers and, most importantly, full of dams?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think that the drought is really, the drought's about snowpack, right? That's our issue, is that we're losing our snowpack in the West, and precipitation. Yes, we're losing precipitation in general, but we're especially losing snow, right? And snow is so important, of course, because it gradually melts, and it keeps our streams hydrated deep into the summer. It's kind of this time release trickle, right? And when precipitation falls as rain instead of snow, it just runs off the landscape right away, and we lose that gradual melt that's so important when it comes to keeping water in streams. So that's what beavers do, right? They're if we're losing our snowpack, well, they're another form of water storage up in the high country. Building their dams, creating their ponds, soaking the floodplains, creating that floodplain sponge that gradually gives water back to the stream. In the form of groundwater and surface water exchange. So, yes, we'd still be, we'd still be losing snow, but we'd have a way of keeping that water on the landscape longer. And a lot of our seasonal streams, I think, would be perennial, right? That's one of the really important things that beavers do, is by keeping water on the landscape longer, they ensure that there's still water in the stream, come August and September. And I think that there are thousands and thousands of stream miles, really all over the American West, that were historically perennial streams that flowed year round, that have become seasonal streams that go dry in the summer and early fall. And if we had more beavers on the landscape, we'd have a way of keeping water in those streams year round. So I think that, that again, thousands of stream miles that were historically perennial have become seasonal, and we need beavers to return that year-round flow.
Did you hear about all of the other benefits that beavers provide themselves and wildlife, and then humans? It would be great if it went in that order. But that one is really quite a big deal, because you're talking about all the time climate change now. And nobody who talks about climate change talks about beavers. Very few people. I know you do, but very, very, I mean, in the news, you just don't see that, human caused. You hear human caused and everybody immediately goes to fossil fuels, which, I mean, they should, but they should also talk about this.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, fortunately, I think that beavers are becoming more mainstream recently, and one of the beaver climate connections that's really helped them achieve wider popularity is the beaver wildfire connection, right? And that's something that the people in the beaver community always kind of, I think, intuitively or anecdotally understood, that hey, these are animals that are spreading water out in the landscape. They're irrigating plants, right? A lush green riparian corridor is less likely to go up in flames than kind of a dry, brown, crispy, swath of vegetation. Beavers, there are definitely lots of anecdotal observations of beavers, creating fire breaks on the landscape. Fire burns down to a wetland and then stops in its tracks. But we didn't really have that documented in the peer-reviewed literature until a couple of years ago, when a scientist named Emily Fairfax published a great paper about beavers creating fire breaks and fire refugia. She actually suggested that beavers are such good firefighters that the Forest Service should change its mascot from Smokey the Bear to Smokey the Beaver, and that achieved a lot of uptake, I think, in the popular culture, because of course we've all experienced wildfire in the last few years. We're all accustomed to smoky summers now, and so that fire connection, I think, really helped beavers kind of go mainstream. So
I think placing a little subliminal in everyone's head, just to the next time you smell that smoke, you see that smoke, think of the absence of beavers.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Emily's talked about the idea of even fireproofing communities with beavers. Could you have this kind of beaver created wetland or riparian buffer, that helps protect, communities in California and other states from wildfire? There's a kind of a public safety benefit there too, potentially.
Why is it impossible for me not to picture a beaver with a clipboard and a hard hat?
Well, they're engineers, man. They're a little fluorescent vest. I can see it.
When people say that they're a keystone species or an umbrella species, what do you think about when you think about the other species that fall under the purview and protection of beavers in a healthy environment?
Yeah, it's practically impossible, not to name a species that doesn't benefit from beavers at some point. Of course, amphibians, love to breed in beaver ponds. They're fantastic rearing grounds for juvenile salmonids, trout, and salmon. Other aquatic mammals, muskrat, mink, otter, moose. See a million waterfowl and wading birds around beaver complexes. I don't know. There's, but it's funny. There are all of these, kind of great classic scientifically proven connections. But every time you go to a beaver complex, there's something cool and new and weird to observe. I'll give you a couple of examples of that. So first, a few years ago, I went to Voyageurs National Park in Minnesota, which is just like this incredible beaver mecca. And there, some of the Park Service biologists took me to this spot where beavers had built this giant pond with a big lodge in the middle. And then the beavers had left the area for whatever reason, as beavers do. Maybe they'd gotten predated or they just moved on or something. And the dam broke down. The whole pond drained, and the lodge was just left sitting, right in the middle of this big kind of wet meadow. And a pack of wolves actually moved into the lodge and raised their pups in this old beaver lodge. So that's, beavers creating habitat for their direct predator. I think that's pretty amazing. And then another cool one, just a couple of months ago, I was in Utah, hanging out with Joe Wheaton, who's a great beaverologist at Utah State, and he took me to this really cool beaver complex, and we're walking around, and we saw a sandhill crane walking along the top of the beaver dam. And I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. I've never seen a sandhill at a beaver complex before. So, I took some pictures, and then I posted the pictures on Twitter, and a person replied and said, hey, zoom in, right at that sandhill crane's feet. So I zoomed in, and there were 2 eggs that she'd actually nested on top of the crest of the beaver dam, which is incredible, right? So that's never been observed in the literature, but anecdotally, it was just this incredible experience of seeing beavers creating this amazing little nesting island, essentially, for sandhill cranes. So again, there's just always some kind of cool, surprising, novel, interesting biological connection to observe every time you're around these animals.
So now that you're this pro in all things beavers, I want to know what it's like to be you now. Like, what are the things you're thinking about? You mentioned that there's this groundswell that Your book and other things have definitely helped to grow people's knowledge and then advocacy for beavers and beaver reintroduction. How is all that going now? Like, what gets you out of bed in the morning really excited to think about and work and advocate for beavers?
I think that one of the cool things about beavers is just what an urban species they are, right? They're, like, I don't think we don't really think about beavers in the same way that we think about, coyotes or raccoons, these animals that can kind of live in our midst, but they really can, they can live anywhere that we tolerate them. I mean, there are more beavers in Seattle than there are in Yellowstone National Park. They're just very hardy animals that do well around people when we give them a chance to live, and they're just so many incredible case studies of beavers, filtering out stormwater pollution in urban areas, or creating these wonderful little pockets of wetland habitat, next to, there's a famous colony of beavers that, is making a living in a Walmart parking lot in Logan, Utah. And there's this wonderful little pocket of wildness in an otherwise kind of desolate, strip mall hellscape. And of course, there's the famous story of Jose, the beaver who moved into the Bronx River, about 15 years ago, and became this kind of emblem of rewilding in a very urban place. So I think to me, that's really exciting. Nature is all around us, right? You don't necessarily have to go to a national park to experience something amazing and wild. And beavers are one of the agents of restoration and rewilding that's creating wildness in some really urban places, and providing these wonderful ecological services in urban areas too. Again, filtering our water, protecting us from wildfires, promoting the fish that we love to catch. They're these wonderful little provisioners of ecosystem services. So I'm excited by beavers in urban places, and also thinking about how we can coexist with them. There are just so many wonderful, great examples all over the country, in places like Martinez, California, where, the local government officials wanted to kill the beavers in the downtown creek, and, citizens organized to save them, and there are lots of good examples of that now, of, communities kind of coming together around these animals to promote urban wildness. So that's really exciting to me.
You're listening to the Rewilding Earth podcast. From humble beginnings to global conservation phenomenon, the rewilding movement continues to grow and thrive amid the greatest ecological challenges our planet has faced in 65 million years. Here's how you can join us and help return balance to nature. First, go to rewilding.org and subscribe to the weekly digest to keep up on the latest rewilding news, interviews, and art. Second, consider donating to support the Rewilding Institute's mission to rewild North America and beyond. And for extra credit, please like, subscribe, and share this podcast to help spread the word. Thanks so much for your support.
What kinds of projects are you seeing that are kind of exciting out there right now, in terms as attitudes change, places where you're seeing them get a new foothold? What kinds of stories do you have to tell about that?
Yeah, there are some really cool stories out there. I was just, I mentioned that I was in Utah recently, and then went up to Idaho, and I was hanging out with Joe Wheaton, this Utah State beaverologist, and then this rancher named Jay Wild, and to me, Jay is just one of the most inspiring, exciting stories in all of beaverdom. He's this kind of this old school Idaho rancher, and he had this kind of seasonal stream that used to provide water to his homestead, and he kind of thought, hey, why is this stream drying up? Oh yeah, it used to have beavers. And he reintroduced some beavers to his land, and also Joe and the Utah State guys built some beaver dam analogs, kind of these human-built beaver dams that give the animals a leg up and kind of help them, convince them to stay in the area. Like, hey, there's some dams here already. This is probably a good place to live. So I had visited Jay for the first time in 2017, and I forget how many dams the beavers had built. Maybe like a 10 or 20 or something like that. And it was like, wow, it's pretty cool. These beavers are doing pretty well. They stuck around, they're building a little bit. So, I was curious to come back 5 years later and see what the beavers were up to. So I went back to Jay's place, and it was just mind blowing. The beavers had built more than 200 dams in the last 5 years.
Wow.
And they built in places that you just wouldn't believe, I think that we sort of have this idea of a good beaver stream being this, kind of gentle, low gradient, meandering stream. But these beavers were building in these really steep, rocky, kind of hardcore environments, in streams with, gradients of, 12 or 15%, streams that you wouldn't consider great beaver habitat. And they were just kind of stair stepping them, creating these beautiful little terraces, and they were just going crazy, so that was just incredible to see. And Jay was seeing, Jay's seen about 2 extra months of water in his stream, thanks to those beavers, just keeping water on the landscape, slowing the flow, hydrating those, that groundwater table. So that was just incredible to see that, hey, Jay started with, I think, I don't know, 5 to 10 beavers. And, 6 or 7 years later, he's got 200 dams and 2 more months of water in his stream. I think that's a pretty incredible, inspiring story. And it's just getting started too. That's the other thing, is that, these beavers are still, spreading up the drainage, finding new areas to colonize, reproducing, spreading through the watershed. So I'm excited to, go back in another 5 years and see what that place looks like.
Well, that story begs the question, how do you get your hands on some beavers? If you're a land trust or a private land owner who's just heard that and they want to do that, you can't just pop on down to a beaver store, right? How do people take part in or find out more about projects that they can use on their land to do the same thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. One of the challenges is that every state has different regulations around beaver relocation, right? There are some states like Washington that make it pretty easy, and then others that like a lot of northeastern states that it's basically impossible. So you would definitely want to start with your your local, whatever your state fish and game agency is, and figure out what the regulations are, and and then see who's doing this work. Sometimes it's the state agency itself that's relocating beavers. Sometimes it's nonprofits who are doing that work. Sometimes it's native tribes in some areas are getting really into beaver restoration, which is incredibly exciting. So yeah, just figure out your local situation, and then go from there. And most of the beavers that get relocated are quote unquote nuisance beavers. I don't love that term, because really, we humans are the nuisance more often than not. But beavers that are damming in irrigation ditches or road culverts, or cutting down people's apple trees or what have you. Beavers that are kind of messing around on private property, and the landowner wants them gone, and relocation can be kind of a way of giving them a new lease on life, and also repopulating some of these areas that historically had beavers and don't anymore.
Now I have a picture in my mind in the Northeast of a guy with a trench coat, and he opens it up and has some beavers in the pockets there. He's like, "Hey, buddy, you need a beaver?"
Yeah, that's how beavers got back to the Bronx. That's the it was one of those black market beaver dealers.
Hey, you have a project you're working on, or you've put the finishing touches on. You're just waiting for your publisher. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So the next book that as you said, nearly done with, that I hope will be out in fall of 2023, is about it's about roads and nature, the science of road ecology, which is basically how roads influence the natural world, and what we can do about that. Everything from building wildlife overpasses and underpasses on major highways to decommissioning or obliterating some of the historic logging roads that are causing big erosion and sedimentation problems in national forests. So thinking about roads at every scale, and in every type of landscape. And I think that's I think that shares some DNA with the the Beaver book. I mean, as you alluded to earlier, Jack, the Beaver book is really about identifying the ways in which our landscapes have changed that we don't fully understand. How did fur trapping transform the land, and how can restoring beavers kind of heal it or begin to heal it? And I think by the same token, roads are this historic environmental impact that we often overlook, right? They're such a kind of a ubiquitous fundamental part of our lives, that we just we use them every single day without really thinking about them. They're almost invisible to us, whereas to an animal as small as a wood frog, or as big as a grizzly bear, roads are kind of the primary human built structures that affect their lives, in really profound and kind of pernicious ways. So, thinking about the ways in which our roads have changed ecosystems, and the things that we can do to, kind of heal those cuts, is really what this book's about.
I heard in the 90s, when we were doing a little bit of road ripping in partnership with the Forest Service, helping them take out roads
Cool.
with augers, and we had a lizard guy with us. And we were taking these great big cores out of these volunteered roads, maybe old logging roads, and he was going behind us and sticking sticks down in the holes that were about 2 feet deep and maybe a foot wide. And we asked him, "What are you doing? Every time we turn around, there's sticks in our holes, and we're trying to." He's like, "Well, I figured my lizards are going to get stuck in these holes. They're too deep, and I'm making lizard ladders." He was a very inventive guy. I'm like, okay, because he wasn't helping with anything else. So he was like, "What's he doing back there?" So he was making lizard ladders for these little holes. And there was a lot of road ripping in the 90s. You just don't hear a lot about road ripping now. It's not, there used to be an organization. There used to be an awful lot of awareness about, in conjunction with roadless areas, with Dave Foreman always talking about roadless areas and protecting them, and the Forest Service being one of the biggest controllers of roads in the country, if not the biggest. What is all of that landscape like now in terms of taking out just roads that not even the Forest Service really wants around and would rather not have to maintain anymore?
Yeah, it's a good question. I haven't heard of the lizard ladder concept, but I really I really like that. I'm gonna look for that now. Yeah, I think that the kind of the Forest Service road decommissioning landscape has, it's changed a lot. I mean, they're still certainly doing a lot of that work, but I think it's become political in a way that maybe it wasn't always. I mean, obviously, wilderness and roadlessness has always been political, but now, I think that there are a lot of powerful, four-wheeler factions and hunters groups and whatnot that obviously love the access that these historic logging roads provide. I mean, look, I use logging roads to get to trailheads and fishing lakes and all kinds of things. So I appreciate a good forest road as much as the next guy. So I think that a lot of, I mean, it's funny, it used to be the Forest Service's historically this agency that managed timber, and now, I mean, probably the biggest thing that it does is manage travel access, right? I mean, the travel management plans that every forest unit creates and kind of abides by. I mean, those are more contentious than any timber harvest plan, and there are all of these factions that get really up in arms whenever a road is gated or obliterated. So I think a lot of road decommissioning projects have been kind of caught up in that, and roads. I mean, it's roads. There's a great historian, a road historian named Jedediah Rogers, and he's written about roads as kind of these expressions of ideology. They're not just physical features. They're also these markers that kind of indicate what the land is for and who should get to use it for what purposes, and who gets to decide how the land is used. Is it the federal government, or is it the county commission that operates adjacent to the national forest? So I think that roads have kind of become sort of these culture war objects in some ways, and I think in many cases That's impeded decommissioning.
You can talk about a specific road and say, I love that road, I need that access, but people don't seem to be having that conversation. It's if you try to come after roads of any kind in any place, it's almost like the gun debate. It's just no, just keep your hands off my roads. So we haven't made much progress if that's the same thing that because we were doing that in the 90s, and before that they were doing it in the 80s, the 70s. What do you see in terms of projects that are good examples of people coming together, compromise being made, work being done to tear out roads that really just are so unnecessary and would have such a benefit to wildlife? There's got to be hot spots where it's probably pretty contentious, but we're winning battles maybe.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, certainly there's a lot of road decommissioning happening from Northwest Montana right now. The Lolo National Forest, the Helena National Forest. I went to both those places and saw some pretty large scale road decommissioning happening. You know what I mean? I do think that one of the cool things about these projects, right, is that they are they're these little stimulus packages, right? You get a bunch of, machinery operators up there, running their backhoes and front loaders and whatnot, tearing roads up. I mean, that's a little economic stimulus project for the earth, especially in these communities that that the timber industry has kind of abandoned. So I think that's an interesting idea, right? You can sort of imagine a new civilian conservation corps, right? I mean, it was the CCC that built something like 125,000 road miles in national forests. And how many people could we hire to tear some of those roads out? So I think that in some of these forests where road decommissioning has happened at a pretty large scale, I mean, I think that that it tends to become somewhat popular over time because everybody has some kind of connection to it, from the Forest Service employees themselves to the machinery operators who get contracted to do some of this work. So how I think it's exciting to think about how road obliteration can be an economic opportunity, and kind of a little stimulus package.
Everything that we have now is on the back of nature, and we have this economy that says we have to grow and we have to perpetually grow, otherwise we die. And I've always fantasized that there's got to be some solution of going back the other direction, sort of like when a ripple from the middle of the pond hits the edge of the pond and starts coming back. And beavers are one of those ripples to me. And what you just mentioned about roads, same thing, taking them back out and that economic stimulus being there just seems like we could probably be a different sort of prosperous than, how we got here, it going back in the other direction and at least doing the 30% and the 50%. We don't want all the roads, we don't want all the land, but just going back to some level of what could be considered closer to balance.
Yeah, it's a beautiful idea for sure. And I mean, I think that, one of the interesting, a lot of what I write about or try to write about in this book is, sort of the analogies or the parallels between, how roads shape nature and in wild communities and how they shape our own lives as humans, I mean, it's, you read about, of course, the history of urban freeways and interstates, in big cities, and how freeways were used as these slum clearance programs to basically intentionally destroy Black and other minority communities, and now there are all kinds of wonderful projects in urban areas to destroy or kind of reconfigure this historically deleterious infrastructure and kind of remake our cities by removing highways from them. I think that's exciting to think about too, is that we've got it's almost happening at these two different scales in these two very different places. We're both obliterating these little tiny dirt logging tracks, that are causing these huge, sedimentation problems in national forests. And we're destroying, in some cases, these giant 4 or 6 lane interstates that are, kind of plowing through the heart of major cities. So, thinking about, the fact that roads are operating at such different scales and such different contexts, and yet, they're, in both cases, they're these huge agents of fragmentation and community collapse, whether human community or natural community collapse. And, how can we kind of pull that knife out, and as you said, kind of, move back to a pre-eroded state, and get some benefits that way. So, yeah, I'm trying to be both, forward thinking, but as you alluded to, kind of rearward thinking as well. How can we kind of undo some of the damage we've done? There are great examples of places where we're removing roads, right? But that's, we have 4 million miles of roads in the United States. And, are we going to remove, what, I don't know, a few hundred or a few thousand miles of them? I think that like all of the Forest Service roads that have ever been decommissioned add up to, I think, about 10,000 road miles. And, meanwhile, there's something like 370,000 miles still in the system, right? So, ultimately, we're kind of stuck with this infrastructure. We're not going to destroy I-70 or 80 or 90, right? These interstates are, they're with us. And, it's wonderful to think that we could change American car culture, but I don't know how realistic that is. I mean, how many people are we really going to pry out of their vehicles? We could give them other transit options, and certainly we should. But we're never going to be rid of our highways or our cars. And in fact, autonomous vehicles are just going to make kind of car culture, I think, probably more convenient and cheap and ultimately entrenched. But a lot of road ecology, I think, works within the system that we have, right? Things like wildlife overpasses and underpasses, and roadside fencing that guides animals to those crossing points. That stuff is great, and it enhances the connectivity of the landscape without really challenging the existing automobility structures, that kind of govern society. And that's something that I've thought a lot about in this book, is like how radical to be in sort of what I prescribe or call for in this book. Are you pragmatic and say, look, we're stuck with these interstates, and let's kind of retrofit them to make them as permeable to animals as possible and as safe as possible? Or do you say, hey, what we really need is this, kind of sweeping change, where, as you said, we get rid of, let's say, 30% of American roads. That sounds, incredible, but I don't know that's ever going to happen. You want to be pragmatic, but you also don't want to be, you don't want the perpetuation of the car to be this self-fulfilling prophecy, obviously, where you say, well, we're just, we're stuck with personal cars, and we're always going to be stuck with personal cars. So, let's just work with the system we have, and try to make it as unterrible as possible.
I think that when you know how much, and your new book's going to be very, very helpful in this to bring out the statistics, but let's take 370,000 miles of forest road, and you go into a discussion with someone and you're debating, I would just say, look, you have 370,000 miles of this stuff. We're never going to get rid of all of it, not in any, reasonable amount of time. We'll all be long gone before any serious progress is made. And we're talking about 10 miles. We just got to get this 10 miles. Can you work with us? And if you frame it that way, maybe we could make some progress. And that also is, though it works far too slow for us, as impatient as we are now, and desperate as we are now, that's the beginning of culture change. There's maybe cars still left in that culture, but we've changed because we're starting to do overpasses. We're starting to take out roads that are unnecessary, giving back to species that really need that area unperturbed. And still everybody has tons and tons of roads.
Yeah, I think that's true. Certainly, I think there have been culture changes in transportation agencies. And when I talk to road ecologists who began this work in the in the 1990s, they say, I mean, look, if you had proposed a multi-million-dollar wildlife overpass in 1995, most state engineers would have laughed you out of the room, right? And now these things are being built all over the place, and they're kind of part and parcel with a lot of projects. So I do think that the cultural change you're talking about is it's happening at the agency level, if not within the general public.
Ben, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I'm really excited about your past work. I'm even more excited about the work that we're all going to be treated to, hopefully next year, when the new book with its new title comes out around road ecology. But man, just thanks so much for taking the time.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jack, and I really appreciate all you guys do. I've really enjoyed going back through the podcast archives. You've had some amazing guests, and I'm honored to be part of it.
Thanks for listening to the Rewilding Earth podcast. We do what we do because of you. This podcast is supported by listeners like you who long to live in a wilder world. Please consider donating at rewilding.org and subscribe to our weekly news and article digest while you're there. To go the extra mile, you can follow and share Rewilding Earth on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Bonus points for sharing this podcast with your friends. To listen to past episodes, go to rewilding.org/pod. That's rewilding.org/pod.